I know it's in a way only episode 8, and I don't know exactly how many episodes this season is going to be, but I feel like, and this might be a bold proclamation, but I feel like episode 8 was my favorite of the season so far, and it's interesting because there wasn't any big battle or anything, but there was just so many reveals about kind of the man behind the curtain, like the Wizard of Oz kind of esque thing about who is really in control of these worlds that we've been introduced to. And I just think there was this feeling of being so in sync with the players in that moment of receiving all the information where like I was sitting there just like absolutely enthralled by it all, like literally feeling like I was at that table with them as the characters learning all that they were learning about this world that they've come from and this bigger kind of idea that has come into play. And it was so astounding and amazing. And like I said, just like there were times where like I'd pause it just to like stare out the window and like reflect on what I had just heard about because it was so profound and so scary, honestly. Like, I think the best way to sum up this season so far in a way that I never expected it to when we found out that it was going to be a horror, fantasy, fairy tale season is that it's literally like if your Sims realized that they were Sims. Like, that's the best way to describe it, and that has always been a horrifying thought to me, to think that, like, you're just a character in someone else's story. It's terrifying. It's terrifying, and I think the way that they dealt with it is as best as they could. I think Scheherazade had a really good reaction, especially when Timothy was starting to turn into parchment, and how she was like, it doesn't matter if we're real or not. Like, I feel real and I'm here right now. I'm feeling you, like this is real. It doesn't matter. And I think that was a really great bonding moment. And I love Scheherazade so much. So I really, really hope she sticks around more and we get to learn more about what's happening in her world of the Endless Nights, because that was one of the big revelations we got, was that Scheherazade's world of the Endless Nights and the Neverafter are kind of both being infected by this Times of Shadow, the worst out of anyone. So we met Aesop, but his world was able to beat back the Times of Shadow. And again, I think when they were explaining it, it kind of goes back to the idea that the goose introduced when bringing Mother Goose back, was that it's not clear if the Times of Shadow happen and then the gander comes and like makes things worse, or if the gander is like a signal of the Times of Shadow coming. Like, it's not sure what comes first, like the chicken or the egg kind of thing. And that was more of this that they were kind of explaining, of like the Times of Shadow are something that always happen. Like, they have happened where it's like something bad happens, the gander comes, it's Times of Shadow, it's bad, and then the goose comes and it's light again. And like they were explaining that that's not happening for some reason. For some reason, the gander has been aflight for way longer than they were supposed to be, and because of that, the Neverafter is becoming this like warped version of itself. But also what I thought was really interesting and really scary is that it seems to be taking on other lands that are near it. So I think they mentioned the Land of Lullabies was one that was not originally in the Neverafter, which is really interesting because when you think of like lullabies like you sing to little kids and stuff like that, yeah, they don't match like a lot of the fairy tales that we've been hearing and getting so far. So it makes sense that like, oh, that's something that was incorporated into the Neverafter, but it's also like, wait, how is this happening? You know, like how has the Neverafter broken free in a sense from like the story that it's supposed to be contained in and start to absorb these other stories? I feel like we still don't know truly who the big bad is, because I think what they're setting up, or at least the vibe that I'm getting, is there's like this big bad, but big bad in a way, but also I feel like big bad in the way of like, you know what it sounded like to me? I know they use the analogy of the ship from Alien, but to me it sounded more like Kang from the Marvel universe, of just how there's like this kind of neutral, really, like, you know what I mean? Like neutral in terms of like, it just depends on what side you're on if you think he's good or bad, because he's just kind of in the way of keeping time going the way that it's supposed to be going. So I feel like it's more like that with the author, of like they are like this like very vast and powerful figure, but at the same time I don't think they have necessarily bad drives right now, if that makes sense. Like, I think they're doing bad things by letting all this suffering happen, but I don't think that they are the originators of this suffering in the Neverafter. I think that that is definitely going to be, I mean, it assumes like the wicked stepmother right now, but maybe it's the more of the fairies, maybe it's a group of the fairies. We know that the wicked stepmother has eaten people before and has eaten at least one book in this that we see in a story and had the etching of the, I guess, Cinderella's dad, right? Her husband had the etching that was literally pulled out of the book that was in the lines between. So I just feel like the way they were setting up this kind of confrontation though with the stepmother seems like they're gonna fight her next episode and maybe defeat her or at least weaken her. And then in my mind, that's not gonna be the big bad. Like obviously the authors are, but then I feel like there's obviously still something happening. Someone in the Neverafter broke out, right? And I do have to mention that the reference that I mentioned before that they talked about how it's like Alien, the ship in Alien, that made me want to vomit when he said that, where it's like these librarians know something's not there with them. They just don't know what it is or where it is. Like something running amok in there and like just messing up these worlds sounds horrifying. And obviously like the stepmother, it was able to get into the place. I don't know if that was because of Pinocchio Crow before Pib was able to kill him, if he was able to set something up for her to come in, or if she's just been traveling through there willy-nilly without them realizing it, or if there's a traitor like Red suggested, if like someone's disguised as one of the staff. We still haven't met Glossary and Index, and just the way I love Key and Legend, don't get me wrong, I ship them so much. I think they're so cute and just like so overworked and so I love them, but the way they kept bringing up like, oh, Glossary and Index can answer your questions, Glossary and Index can answer your questions, had me a little bit suspicious that either Glossary or Index are going to be dead when we go to check in on them, or there's some kind of like thing going on, because they've been talking about how like the person that made the rules for the lines between is gone and like they're kind of been struggling. They've got these literal parts of the castle that are like crumbling or changing like as they go. They've got the oratory, which is like the way that they tell oral stories, but it's supposed to be safe, and yet when Red and Pib went in it, it tried to pull them down under. So it's like clearly something's broken in this lines between, and the question is it a break that is now spreading to the Neverafter, or is it a break in the Neverafter that someone was able to get to like the original ink, the author that like runs it all, change that, and now that is causing consequences in the lines between itself. I feel like that kind of might be more of it, of someone was able to get into the lines between on behalf of Neverafter, like making something good with them, like they want some kind of power there, and now it's spreading to the lines between, like they're there messing with things that they shouldn't be messing with. And apparently this all-powerful, super important place is only run by like 5 librarians, which I love when Allie was like, who hasn't met a library that's understaffed? I'm like, true, Allie, very, very true. But like, it's just funny that like, even when Pib was hiding in the room and they were like, oh, we left the door open again, we gotta forget about this, like we can't keep doing this. And I'm like, are you gonna go check to make sure no one's in there or something? Like they knew the crow was flying around and was like potentially very, very bad, and like they were just so casual. But like I feel like they're also just overworked and tired, and like they're terrified of the authors and stuff like that, and they're just trying to do their best to keep it how they can. So we got a lot of lore. I feel like Allie is known for rolling the nat 20s, and they rolled some phenomenal, like very important ones this episode. I don't mean to take away from that, but this season, I feel like Zach has been coming in so clutch with the nat 20 rolls, and it's just been so amazing to see, especially with like in terms of how he's able to see things and figure out things that the other party doesn't. I think it's just funny storytelling wise that like the rogue trickster kind of guy is the one seeing all these things and like just being like, oh, what am I gonna do with this information? I love that we got to see Alphonse the mule again, and how Pib was just like, you left us. We were in there, man. We were deep in the mud with you and you fled. And he was like, don't blow this for me. I'll do whatever you want. Like it was just interesting too, the idea that Alphonse brought up, because it's like he just ran and then all of a sudden like the world kind of collapsed where he was. So now it's like if the doors, like they're talking about, are kind of melding, it seems like maybe this isn't supposed to happen. So maybe like as the Neverafter does get bigger, it's also going to get more unstable is what I'm thinking of. Like if it's trying to absorb other worlds, like obviously I would think those worlds are going to fight back. But what really, really got me this episode, and I have to give it up to Allie again, was when they were talking about the author and how like the author is making these stories, but like in these stories like Cinderella's mother is always dead, and even like Aurora's story, how she has like no autonomy of her own, and like they were talking about like how like they just don't care, the authors. Like they just do a curse when they want to do a curse, and they do a blessing when they want to do a blessing. And I wish someone had brought it up, because I thought of it immediately when they were like, oh, when a curse, when it needs to be a curse. Why did Aurora deserve a curse? She was a baby. Like, how could you ever justify that? And I think that's what Allie was starting to bring up as Mother Goose, of like, why do bad things happen to good people? And it's like the way they described it was just bad things happen to good people because it's a good story. And that's awful. And I read something later on Tumblr to explain that, of like, the idea is so terrifying of like people caring about you because you've suffered, you know? Like, it's like we want Cinderella to win and get her prince and get her happily ever after because we've seen all the trauma she's been through with the stepmother, right? And it's like terrifying to think that like you don't expect, like you wouldn't care as much about Cinderella if like she was just a happy girl, had a happy life, and then married a prince. Like you'd be like, oh, that's awesome for you. But it's because she goes through all that suffering that it's the idea of these authors care more. That it's like, oh, you had to go through all of this to get your happily ever after. And the idea that like only through going through that suffering makes you meaningful to someone is very, very terrifying. And I think that's kind of the idea of what the authors are getting at, of like they throw these things out willingly. Like, look at Red and Pinocchio. They're both children. Like, why did this deserve to happen to them? And even Gerard, like, yeah, he was a dick as a kid, but like, is that a fair thing to do to a kid rather than just trying to teach him like a better moral? Like to turn him into an actual frog? Like, how is that fair, you know? So I think it examines the complexity, they said, of like all the stuff of like Aesop's were very straightforward because they were kind of like, this happens, this is nature, here's the moral. Like, they're short, they're sweet, they're simple. Humans, on the other hand, are more complex because you can be like, oh yeah, I get the story. Like, I'm glad that Cinderella, like, got her happy ending, but then you're like, wait, why? Like, you know, like, what kind of role did the stepsisters really play in this? Like, you could make a case that, like, maybe they were also just, like, trying to survive under a hostile mom. All these different nuances, and that's why you see in real life, like, so many different takes on fairy tales and stuff like that, because there's so many different human complexities that you can put into it. So I just feel like that really terrified me, to think that there's, like, these are characters. Like, I knew they were characters, but now, like, realizing you're a character is, like, terrifying, right? And it's like, you're just someone else's story. It kind of reminds me of, Brennan has a quote when he did the Critical Role thing, oh my gosh, the Exandria one, where it's like, you all are just a bad first draft. And that's kind of what it feels like, of, like, you piss these people off enough and they're just gonna rewrite you or erase you or something like that. And it's gonna be interesting to see. I want to see how much of these stories are, like, them fighting back, because like obviously Rosamund is very much like fighting back because she's starting to realize, like, my story, I do nothing and like everything happens to me and I don't get a say in it, and that's stupid and it sucks. And then Red, I feel like obviously is struggling with a whole lot. Red's story, the more I see about it, the more I think her story is going to play such an important role in the end. I feel like hers might be like the break free, or the breakthrough of like changing of the stories or something like that, because her story is so far from what it's supposed to be and she's so terrified of it and so wants it to just go back to what it is right and what it's supposed to be. And I feel like her whole journey is going to be like realizing that like the right story is this story because you're living it, and I'm just so excited to see that. So yeah, this definitely had some big implications for what's going to happen the rest of the season. Definitely, more so than reality breaking, more so than the idea of multiverses, just the idea of this like uncaring kind of clinical person that's just in charge of your life and like literally can write it, but then also has this world that like someone has broken into, and now someone is taking those rules that the person is in charge of and spinning them to their own benefit. Like, that's terrifying. So I really hope they figure out who's hiding in the lines in between quickly, because like I said, that's just scary to think that someone's roaming around here and just messing things up. And I'm really worried for like Aesop's world and Scheherazad's world, because I feel like now that they've all connected, the doorways might be open more for the stepmother to come through or something like that. And I just feel like it's going to be very, very scary. So yeah, if you have seen this episode, please feel free to leave your thoughts and your theories and your reactions to all the reveals down below, because it was intense to say the least. And I am just so excited to see where it is going to go from here. I was wrapped. Like I said, I was like full attention, like just like soaking it all in. Like, this is terrifying. Like, it's horrific, and it's like not even like blood or gore or anything like that. Just the idea of like someone being in control of your reality and you waking up and realizing that, and realizing not only are they in control of your reality, but they don't really care. They just care about the story. That's horrifying. So yeah, let me know what you thought about the episode down below in the comments. Also, make sure to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!